Yeah. And it is just a lot.
Her daughter is texting, she's not there right now, she's. So I don't know, just, should I get up?
April 6th, 2022, Bartonville Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Congratulations.
Congratulations to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice and justice for all.
Public hearing.
You should have all a copy of your minutes here.
Discuss and consider approval of the March 14th, 2022 special meeting minutes. Anybody have anything to change? Motion. Wasn't here.
I was making a motion.
Okay.
We need it. One of the and then two.
No, we have,
Okay.
we approved the others that you were signing.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from the 14th day of March.
Second. Second. All in favor? Okay, public hearing to okay, if you wish to address the commission, please fill out a meeting appearance card and present it to the town administrator. Verbally before the meeting begins pursuant to section 551-007 of the Texas Government Code. Citizens wishing to address the commission for items listed as public hearing will be recognized when the public hearing is opened. For citizens wishing to speak to non-public hearing items, they may either address the commission during the public participation portion of the meeting or when the item is considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Is there anyone who wants to speak to something other than agenda items?
Haven't received any comment cards.
If anyone wants to speak to any of the agenda items, please fill out a comment card and give it. Okay. Public hearing to receive public comment and consider recommendation to the town council regarding ordinance amending the town of Bartonville Code of Ordinances, chapter 14, exhibit A, article 14-02, ordinance 361-05, zoning regulations, division 1, general requirements, chapter 2, definitions, beauty and barbershop. Staff.
So this item is really just trying to get ahead of requests that we believe will be coming in over the next year or so as the Cloud9 salon and spa relocates to Bartonville, the new building, which again is listed on your agenda, but will not be taking action on tonight. The requirement from the state for any cosmetic tattooing to occur in a specific location is that they have to receive approval from the town, some sort of zoning letter or something indicating that they are allowed to operate in that zoning district. If it's not otherwise classified, it would be classified as some sort of a tattoo parlor, tattoo salon, something of that nature. So Tammy worked on a draft definition that really just lumps cosmetic tattooing in with barber and beauty shops, which is what a number of other cities have done. And so this is not at the request of any individual specifically, it was just because questions were raised by, I think, one of the employees or tenants that King Cloud has in the existing salon. They wanted to just kind of preemptively ask the question, so we're trying to just handle it now so it doesn't become an urgent situation later. I know there was at least one comment from Commissioner McDonald about the definition that we kind of discussed internally and are actually recommending a minor change to the draft language that's in your agenda. But I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have, or if you have anything else that you were curious about. It's specific to the section about apparel. So potentially removing that small clause that says ordinance apparel, which would make it so that the definition would read an establishment primarily engaged in providing services generally involved in the care of the person, including but not limited to barber and beauty shops, tanning salons, ear piercing shops, cosmetic tattooing shops, and reducing salons. So it would be removing the ordinance apparel section from the definition.
So this would not encompass like a regular tattoo shop.
Correct. It would only be cosmetic tattooing, which is just related to,
There's not any way that a tattoo shop could read the definition and think they're allowed.
the way that the ordinance reads, if there's a use that's listed in the land use table that's very comparable, that's easily translatable, like for example, if it listed barber shop, but it was not going to be called a barber shop, it was just going to be a hair salon, those would be, I think, comparable uses, and that gives discretion to the town secretary to allow that under the existing use. But anything outside of that is required to come back before you and the town council as a new and unlisted use. My interpretation of a request for a tattoo parlor coming in would be that is not the same use as what is in the definition here, and we would bring that through the process of, just like you've done with the car wash previously, and we'll do for any other new unlisted uses to come through.
Applicant has,
We don't have an applicant for this.
so there's anyone to speak for it or against?
Do you want to open the public hearing specifically?
Open public hearing at 7:10.
Thank you.
Anyone that wishes to speak for or against this item? Can close the public hearing, 7:11. Open for discussion.
I have a question concerning the definition, because under the proposed definition, it says in the last line, cosmetic tattooing shops. And then under the Department of State Health Services, they say permanent cosmetics. So why don't we use permanent cosmetics in our definition and avoid ambiguity?
I think that's certainly something that we could make that change easily tonight.
And there's a couple of different ways of saying it.
Legally, you're fine with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, you also see here, the Department of Health Services calling it intradermal cosmetics. So, I don't want to really a tattoo, but, you know, there's a couple other ways of saying it to avoid it sounding like what you know it's not.
I don't have a problem with doing this. I just want to make sure we not approving a tattoo shop.
So with that change, are you all okay with the other change that I mentioned earlier of the removing the ordinance funeral? So the draft I have now is barber and beauty shop, an establishment primarily engaged in providing services generally involved in the care of the person, including but not limited to barber and beauty shops, tanning salons, ear piercing shops, permanent cosmetics, and reducing salons.
I do too.
So we need to
We do need a motion for recommendation.
recommend putting that into.
I move we recommend to council the addition of this proposed definition to our ordinances with, as amended.
Second, all in favor?
The next item was just mistakenly relisted on the agenda. You all took action on that previously. So the third item regarding fencing, walls, and screening requirements is the only other item we have action for tonight.
Do we need to make a motion to continue?
No, you've already taken action on that item in the
Oh, okay.
recommendation
I'm
of
thinking
council. It just
I'm thinking-
mistakenly was listed here.
Alright.
So the next item would be the third one, which is the public hearing, receive comment. Regarding fencing. And I think when we actually pass out a paper agenda to you, if that's easier for you to read the items out. Maybe just one. I think you should follow it. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we've already handled the second item. The third item is public hearing, fencing, walls, and screening requirements. Public hearing to receive public comment and consider recommendations to town council regarding an ordinance amending the town of Bartonville Code of Ordinances, chapter 14, exhibit A, article 14-02, ordinance 361-05, the zoning regulations for the town of Bartonville by amending division 4, special requirements in chapter 20, fencing, walls, and screening requirements.
So this is an item that was actually requested by Mayor Scherer in a previous council meeting and then was brought back to the council for discussion at a later date. Last month, the town council called for public hearings to consider amendments to the section of the ordinance related to screening and fencing, specifically to, I guess, try to get ahead of any requests that may come in from any new subdivisions that would intend to place masonry screening walls, solid masonry fencing, around the perimeter of subdivision where that may abut a public street. And so currently the ordinance would not allow that along FM 407. It requires at least 50%, or sorry, a maximum of 50% masonry. So there has to be some transparency of the fence, whether that's masonry and wrought iron or whatever the design might be. We also don't allow solid fencing in front yards, so that's not something that we'd have to be concerned about. But in the example of Trifecta Estates, for example, that just went in off of McMakin, it's an additional street coming off of one of the major corridors through town where the home's side yards actually are along that major roadway. So there's not really an ordinance in place that would have prevented that from being a solid masonry fence, which was not the desire of the council, at least, and calling for these public hearings. So I think that the plan tonight would be to discuss with you and why the thoroughfare plan is included. Would you like to see that extended to other roads in town? When we had a discussion about it at council, there was some consideration for extending that to not just McMakin, but also to Porter, maybe Broome, Jeter, and then potentially even Freshtown, Gibbons. So in looking at the thoroughfare plan, that really kind of highlights all of those that are considered to be, major, or sorry, rural collectors or minor collectors or local thoroughfares. They're kind of all those main roads on the thoroughfare plan. But if you would like to make a recommendation for the town council to extend this ordinance to other places, it would be helpful to list them specifically by street name.
We'll open the public hearing at 7:16. And there's no point to speak for or against.
Don't believe so?
So the one that's on McMakin is what would be acceptable.
It would be, just because it's not masonry the entire height of the fencing. But what you've seen, I don't have examples here, but on the newer subdivisions that are coming in, you may remember on Hudson Ranch, Hudson Hills, or Eagle Ridge, I'm sorry, it's not Hudson, just Eagle Ridge that borders 407. There's been some discussion in the past, I guess before my time here, about subdivisions coming in and potentially requiring a full masonry fence around it. And the council at least said that was not within their vision to see solid masonry fences driving through the major roads through town. So I think the intent would be to extend this to other places. So it may be that the fence has some sort of masonry product for columns and then another type of fencing in between so that it's a little bit more open. So it doesn't preclude the use of masonry at all. It's just no solid masonry fences or screening walls, such as what they kind of turn out to be.
Yes, what is the intent of this regulation per se? Is it because they don't want the masonry fence? They don't want blocking views?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak 100% for them, but from what I've heard it is that there's not a desire to have solid walls when you're driving through town, that you're seeing solid walls to kind of keep the more open feel where you can see through to what's kind of on the other side of the fence.
So if I put a wrought iron fence up and then put hedges behind it where you can't see, that would accomplish the same thing as the solid fence.
So I would actually interpret a solid hedge to be a type of a use as a fence. And so I'd have to look at our fence definition specifically, but I would say if it's used for the purpose of fencing, it should be considered fencing, a fence or fence material. I don't know if it's a question for.
No,
town attorney.
I mean, fences can be either inert materials like stone or rock or wood, or it can be live like bushes or petunias or something like that. So that's it. But this is contemplated only on major roads, not all the residential roads in town.
Which I think the intent was that we want to keep it looking country, not
A walled community.
a walled community like most of the cities around us.
Is it ideal to get to block the developer from putting this around their development? Or is it also individual citizens who happen to, as I say, their lot happens to be, back up or sideways to one of the main roads? Would they be prevented from putting up a solid fence? Is that?
They would be, if there's no exception for if you're a single lot versus multi-lot development, but that's why I think that they want to be very cautious about extending it to specific roadways and not just as a blanket, ordinance throughout town potentially. I don't know, that's really up to you to decide to make a recommendation to council on how you'd like to expand it, but most of the roadways there that are listed or that are called out on the third plan don't have a ton of side yards on them. They do have some. I mean, I can think of some examples, but most of them don't. I mean, we don't see this a lot with residences in Bartonville, that we have requests on these larger lots to fully enclose a backyard or side yard. I don't, it's not something that's very common here, but the intent definitely is related to new development coming in. If somebody brings in a small subdivision, buys a few parcels and wants to put in even 4 homes or 6 homes or whatever the size subdivision it might be, a lot of the time the desire is to kind of have like a kind of a gated community feel or a solid wall around the development. And that is, I think, the intent of making some changes to this ordinance to try to prevent that.
And really what my understanding when council sent it to us in the first place was looking at Lantana and a whole wall of solid walls over there. And Bartonville's never wanted to look like that. We've turned down things to go along our side that TxDOT wanted to do even. Partially some of that was because we didn't want to pay to do greenery and things that they were going to do, but the idea of putting in sidewalks and making it look like the other side, which was mentioned at one point, was horrifying to me. a lot of folks here. So that's where this came from, but we never really ever discussed anything except for 7 until now suddenly the potential, and apparently they're not gonna do it, but we could have ended up with the same kind of thing on Macon with this new subdivision going in that we're trying to not look like on the Montana side. So it's kind of getting in front of, as opposed to waiting until, oh no, look at that horrible thing, I wish we had something in place to where that couldn't have happened. So that was the intent, pardon me?
Including 407.
407 is already taken care of. It's that we haven't included anything but 407. So if a subdivision goes in on any of the interior streets, Porter or, and Macon right now is getting one, we could potentially, without changes in this, end up with the same kind of wall thing that we don't want in the interior, which would even make people here more unhappy than if it was out on 407.
I just look at the people that's gonna be buying the lots along 407 across from Tractor Supply. That's gonna be nice.
Well, the
That's why they
developer,
put up those barriers for the noise control.
well, this was put in place already, and he is well aware, and he's already agreed to it.
Yeah.
He's okay.
But what I'm looking at is the individual putting up barriers.
Which they can't. I mean, they can put some trees and some shrubs, they can't do a full line. Right, but you know, nowadays, you can get very soundproof windows, you can build homes very nice, and you're not gonna hear as much. But you're gonna be outside, you're gonna hear it, but even with a fence, if you're outside, you're gonna hear it.
I think Terry had a good point about the shrubbery being a potential problem for bears. And I think we should have an ordinance that includes residences as well as these major streets, because we can't trust the HOAs, you know, in these new subdivisions to comply with our wishes. And then there may well be noise problems, but that's part of it. That's the virus. Yeah.
407 and the Bacon are given. What other streets make sense?
Do we need to list them separately, the main thoroughfares that we?
Yes, please, that would be
Oh,
part of
yeah.
your motion.
Okay.
So other streets should.
Let's say, let's make Macon and Cedar
Porter,
for the road,
yeah, that's what's on.
and then also next Gibbons. Road, it's not sure.
The only one on here, actually, if you look at your map, the local thoroughfares, which are considered the smaller, less traffic ones, is Broome and West G. I'm kind of thinking, why would we want to not do it for the roads in town? Why would it be okay to restrict, I mean, not restrict, but not want solid fencing on the faster roads or the more traveled, and yet make it be okay on West Jeter and Broome, which are the same kind of roads? Seems to me like if we're gonna do it, we ought to just make it a blanket thing for the town and not have to go back and revisit this, or not have it come up later with a subdivision going on, you know, going in someplace else and somebody wants to put a solid wall up. It seems to me like just making it for the town, trying to take care of it.
I agree. Once somebody does it once, then it's
Yeah.
harder
Yeah.
for us to stop.
Yeah.
So is there any, okay, Gibbons, Jeter, Broome, what other roads?
Gloria's saying that was first list of whole towns. Right? Is that what I understood?
Is that an issue, Ken?
No, it just becomes an enforcement issue for staff. But as far as
Well,
Also, that's right, you can make that recommendation to the council.
should be, what kind of roads do we call Gibbons and Jeter?
Well, West
Minor
Jeter,
collector.
Jeter is actually 3 different types of roadways in different sections. It's a local, it's a rural collector, it's a minor collector, and it's a local thoroughfare. It's all 3 in different sections. So I think that does make it easier if you would like to just list the streets by name. Unless you really do have
No,
different
I was thinking
preference on
that-
different sections, so.
By the type of road, but I guess that won't work here. Jeter's.
Because it has different sections.
Could we do basically all the roads except for subdivisions?
What does that mean? I'm sorry, by except subdivisions.
So, for instance, Stonewood, you couldn't do anything on it, or if you go off of Gibbons over to that area, you turn off of Gibbons, that's subdivisions. So you're not ruling out those, rather than just saying, I'm gonna do these roads. We're doing it all except for subdivisions. The roads that go off of these main roads.
So you're saying the roads on the map with the colors and ignore the rest of them?
I think that's pretty well encompassed by, with making Jeter, Porter, Broome, Gibbons, and Frenchtown are the same. Those 6.
I think we're still thinking of what if some other road that we're not listing, a development pops up, you know, we just can't foresee in the future. Do we need to cover that now or just stick with these roads?
We still don't allow somebody to put a fence out across the front of the property.
Correct. The front yard is already protected in the entirety of town. There's no allowance for a solid fence in the front
So-
yard.
So it's subdivision.
Just when a new, really when a subdivision goes in, when it's a side yard, or when you have a key lot, you may have or like a corner lot, rather, you may have a side yard. When the side, it's kind of complicated, the side yard of one home abuts the front yard of another home, like if they face 2 different directions, kind of 90-degree angle from each other, that's already protected because that's treated as a front yard. So it's really only if you had somebody's side yard along the road and a home that backed up to them where their side yard was also along that road, where they may be able to put a solid fence in their side, their rear yard really could be enclosed. I don't know how common that is. I don't know how likely that is. Nobody
How do
that I've seen.
we, how do we
has-
allow them to do that? And still do this? I can't think of an example. What that would be.
I'm not so terribly concerned about an individual like somebody up in Stonewood. I'm more concerned about if, I don't know off the top of my head how much open land is still up in Stonewood, but let's say there's 20-acre piece of property up there, that's RE2. So it could potentially one day become a subdivision, and we're not covering it by not putting that road in, even though we're covering all the rest of the town with what we're doing now. That's the only potential downfall I see to to doing just the colored one, which, I'm good with that unless, these unintended consequences that we don't think about ahead of time. I don't know if there's a potential for that and if we would be opening Stonewood up to having a big old wall around something up there, and doesn't matter.
And we don't want that anymore than we want it on Jeter.
No,
But if there's a future developer that comes in, like we just did the plot up there across from Texas Supply, they have to bring all of their proposals ahead of time. So, can't you, we can't anticipate.
Well, we can't.
No, we can't do it if we don't have an ordinance.
Disallow it,
We can't change the rules.
we can't change the rules when we get there.
Okay, so what protected us on 407 right there for telling that developer that he couldn't build a
It
stone?
was already in place.
Ordinance are-
This is already in place for 407.
407.
What we're looking at is adding McMakin and these other roads. And what
they
Gloria is
can bring it up
saying
and
is,
say, well,
even if
it's
we
not
add
in the
these-
ordinance.
Even if we add these other roads, what if there's a 20-acre thing, we don't want a wall down there either, so how do we,
Yeah.
how do we get to that?
To council to extend this to the.
I think that would cover it, just if we, said all roadways.
It may never, ever come up, but if it does,
We have.
we have a whole bunch of people in Stonewood that would be fit to be tied and nothing we could do about it because we didn't include them when we just tried to protect the whole town for what people wanted here.
So this is part of the zoning ordinance, and if somebody for an individual lot had a need for some sort of solid on their yard, then this ordinance would prevent them from building. They would go through a variance process.
Yes,
And that would
So they have alternatives.
If it was a special situation, they could get a variance for it.
Like the one you were describing.
Right, they could request it'd be up to the board of adjustment, but they could request a variance, so there's at least a process in
That
place.
sounds like a better situation than taking the chance that there's an area that we're not covering and they're gonna put up a wall across the front.
So that were. if that's
So-
the recommendation.
So a recommendation would be to council to include,
To extend the requirements currently in place for F 407 to all roadways in town. I think
yes,
that's pretty
Mhm.
sufficient.
So,
Is that, are we overstepping, Ed?
No, it's just, like I said, only for staff. Because one of the things that's gonna happen, just as a real practical matter, is that people who want a privacy fence that's board on board don't already have one, you may run into some enforcement issues. Have we done a survey? Do we know where all the board on board fences are in town? And someone wants to put one up or repair one, did it come in before the ordinance is passed or afterwards? That kind of thing. I mean, it's just an enforcement. That's really the main practical issue there. But as far as wanting to have this kind of a design feature townwide, there's no prohibition on that.
I think that that's what we should do, and then if we have a situation, they can come for a variance. Do we need to put something in the ordinance that says, it spells out that there's variance that,
No, it's already there. It's already in the books.
okay,
For anything, zoning ordinance, if you want to vary and change something based on some individual needs, you've already got that.
okay.
there's another option, but I don't know if I'm digging a hole that doesn't need to be there, but let's say Larry decided he wanted to put, he was on Stonewood, which he isn't, but if he was, and he wanted to put a solid wood fence around his own backyard, isn't there a way we could consider building in for an individual? What we're trying to stop isn't anybody getting to fence their backyard as much as we're trying to stop big walls that would be put around a subdivision. Am I,
That does parse things down to a level that's really going to take a lot of wordsmithing, the way you just phrased it. I think that's why starting off by naming the major collectors, the main roads was a little simpler approach because it was kind of taking on what you already have in place for 407 to apply to other main thoroughfares to avoid the walled subdivision look like in Plano and Frisco and Lintown and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that was why the thought started from naming roads. It will be a little bit dicier if you make it apply town-wide to have a 50% fence and someone wants a privacy fence, then everyone who wants a privacy fence will have to get a variance.
I'm not thinking I don't know how often that comes up or if it's come up.
Well, it hasn't come up because there's no requirement for them to get a variance for now, so we would.
But we do have some kind of restriction about what fencing can be, and it isn't just in the subdivision ordinance, I don't think. Don't we have, because I remember us talking about chain link fence, wasn't it? You know, was.
Well, those are for some of those things between residential and commercial.
Okay.
Well, in fences in residential areas, there's a specific section that talks about, they may be constructed of wood, pipe and cable, decorative metal, wrought iron, chain link, or woven wire mesh. Other materials traditionally used in private fence construction are allowed. And it goes on and on. There's a whole number listed of types. And, like of types of fencing that are allowed.
So by passing this the way if we recommend it the way we're talking about it, does that not conflict with what's in the ordinance now?
Well, as I said here, I'd have to say I would have to look at that. But it seems to conflict. It might, didn't anticipate that question. We sort of envisioned this discussion to go on naming roads. So y'all have added a different thing that frankly I would need to look at.
But if we just say roadways, if we just change it to roadways, then a person like in the example you had with Larry, they wouldn't be prohibited from putting up a fence, would they, unless they're adjacent to a roadway?
Is that right?
Well, that does add a qualifier that limits it, but we've already got that for front yards, because mostly front yards are on roadways. So then you're talking about corner lots. Right?
Right. So the way it's written for FM 407, I think we would be extending that to other roadways, whether it's any types of streets in town. So it's fences and walls on lots that abut, we would say on lots that abut. Any roadways within the town shall be 50% transparent, solid fences and
That
walls.
would remove, sorry, I didn't mean-
No, you're fine, that was it.
that would remove the privacy fence part of the backyard.
Unless they were on a corner lot, in which case, right now, if you're on a corner lot and you are non-residential, we don't allow solid fences on the side yard.
Right.
So we would just be extending that to residential.
So we're back to,
All roadways.
All roadways.
okay,
So it would be a motion to extend the requirements currently in place for FM 407 fencing to lots abutting any roadways in town.
that's him. Does that cover
I think so. Although remember, this is also just a recommendation to the town council and they can
it? Do whatever.
make changes or accept or reject what.
Actually, I'm doing it to all roadways, and that gives them the option to reduce it down to specific roadways.
Okay, I'm good with
I like
that.
Motion.
Nobody wants
I
to
got
like
one.
that.
We're making a motion recommended to council, the revision, changing from the pitching requirement from 407 to all roadways in town.
You
Second,
have something else?
I'm sorry, who seconded that? Okay, I'm sorry, I just heard.
What wasn't your wording?
I think that's more than
Okay.
sufficient. I think that.
Yeah.
All in favor? Yeah.
The final item is a site plan for Cloud9, which, just for informational purposes, all of the variances that were requested were approved at the Board of Adjustment meeting earlier this evening, but we're not recommending any action at this time as we're still in review. There are still some documents that the town engineer needed to receive from the applicant.
A motion to postpone it, or
We'll
just
just take no action at this
no
time.
action taken, no action.
But the-
Public hearing is closed at 7:42.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good job, Chair. So the public hearing was closed right after the motion.
It's okay.
Okay.
It works.
And
And the next item you're not taking action, so.
P&C is adjourned at 7:43. Yeah, I think if we left it just naming those roads, it would pop up somewhere.
It would